Kevin Warsh had his first meeting as the Federal Reserve chairman, and while the markets didn't necessarily like the new position the Fed is taking, this could be a pivotal moment in how the Federal Reserve dictates monetary policy moving forward. Good afternoon. This update will be on the longer side, and I will own that, but there is a lot that happened last week, and I don't want to shortchange any of it. Kevin Warsh has officially checked off his first Federal Reserve meeting as chair, and while the markets were more focused on what he was going to say than what action he was going to take, the decision to hold rates unchanged was about as close to a lock as it gets. A big portion of this update will cover the key takeaways from this press conference, so we'll get into that. On top of that, markets continue to be volatile through the back end of a shortened holiday week last week, and a lot of that noise is coming from the ongoing peace deal situation. The finalization is still very much hanging on a string. The White House announced early this week that the Treasury Department has authorized Iranian oil sales for the next 60 days as a good faith move to keep the talks moving forward, and that will cover production, delivery, and sale of Iranian oil while negotiations continue. With that being said, we've already seen the 10-year Treasury climb back up to 4.5% to start the week after closing on Thursday around 4.42% mark. So the market is still very much in a wait and see mode on all of this. Let's dive into what took place last week and how it affected mortgage rates. Here are your headlines. Kevin Warsh made a strong first impression in his debut as Fed chair and made it clear right out of the gate that things are going to operate differently under his leadership at the Federal Reserve. The statement itself was short and to the point, a total of 4 paragraphs, which was a statement in itself. The Fed unanimously voted to hold rates unchanged, a notable show of consensus given that several members had previously signaled support for hikes. Warsh committed to the 2% inflation target, said the Fed will deliver on it and drop the easing bias entirely, which was what initially sent the markets negative, as that takes off the hope for future cuts this year. There was no forward guidance in the statement, which was very much by design. Now, the markets had a negative reaction to 2 things coming out of the meeting. First, the dot plot. The Fed got more hawkish overall, meaning that they would support higher rates in order to achieve their goal, with half the members expecting at least 1 rate hike this year, 5 expecting none, and 1 expecting a cut. The thing worth noting here is that Warsh did not participate in the dot plot, which was a deliberate signal that he does not believe in forward guidance and is downplaying its importance. And honestly, let's face it, the markets react to that chart every single meeting, but it almost is never close to reality, and it changes so quickly that it barely means anything by the next meeting. And second, the summary of economic projections showed an upgrade to inflation expectations, which is what really moved the market in the wrong direction. During his press conference, Warsh was disciplined. He did not offer any personal opinions, gave a lot of credit to the committee, and when questions were clearly trying to bait him into forward guidance, he kept redirecting back to the statement. His philosophy is straightforward. He wants the markets to react to incoming data, not how the Fed is going to respond to the incoming data, and that is how it should work. When asked about holding a press conference after every meeting, he said he believes he should speak when he has something important to say, and with all the changes coming, he suspects that there will be important things to comment on. That does open the door for skipping press conferences when there is nothing meaningful to add. On that note, Kevin Warsh announced plans to create task force to reshape how the Fed operates. The 4 areas are the Fed balance sheet, which will review the benefits, risk, and composition of the balance sheet and explore alternative frameworks for balance sheet policy. Evaluating new data sources and making changes to get more accurate, relevant, and actionable information on the state of the economy. Productivity and jobs in the era of AI, which will survey the pace, reach, and economic impact of new technologies, including AI. And the Fed's inflation framework, which will examine the drivers of inflation and weigh the full range of ideas needed to deliver price stability in a changing economy. Overall, the meeting was impressive. The negative market reaction was likely the dot plot changes and the upgraded inflation expectations doing what they always do. The good news is that they will meet in 5 weeks for their July meeting, and we will hopefully see a drop in oil prices bring relief to inflation in the coming months. Now, in housing news, pending home sales, a key measure of signed contracts on existing homes, rose 3.8% from April to May, exceeding expectations and marking the fourth consecutive monthly increase. Sales were also 4.8% higher than a year ago, with gains reported in all four major U.S. regions. So, what is the bottom line? Lawrence Yun, chief economist of the National Association of Realtors, points to a quote unquote late spring buyer rush as evidence that buyer demand remains stronger than many expected, even with elevated mortgage rates. If that demand persists while housing inventory remains limited, competition for available homes could stay elevated. Now, in other economic news, retail sales jumped 0.9% in May and beat expectations. Now, that is a headline that sounds great on the surface, but here is my honest take. I'm a little skeptical of the celebration when you see the retail sales spike in an environment where inflation is elevated. The first question you have to ask is whether people are spending more or just paying more for the same things. I still think there's a version of this story where the American consumer is stretching further to maintain the same lifestyle, not actually getting ahead. With that being said, resilient consumer spending in the face of elevated rates and costs is not something to brush off. We have seen it in the housing numbers too. Buyers are still showing up despite affordability being a real hurdle. People are finding a way, whether it is coming out of savings, leaning on credit, or just adjusting habits. The demand is still there. For now, that is a net positive for the economy, even if the sustainability of it is worth watching. Another big week in the books, and there is still more to come. Wednesday brings May's new home sales report, which will be worth watching given the momentum we have been seeing on the housing side. Thursday is a heavier day. We will get the Fed's preferred inflation measure, PCE, the final reading of the first quarter GDP, and the weekly jobless claims update. All three of those will have a direct impact on where mortgage rates trend heading into July. On top of that, the market is going to keep an eye on the Iran situation and whether the ceasefire extension and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz actually starts to pull energy prices lower. If it does, that is the relief valve on inflation that everybody has been waiting on, and it could set up for a more favorable rate environment going into the second half of the year. I'll be in touch next week with a full breakdown, but for now, have a great rest of your week.